Thank you, Caroline. I'm not going to try and summarise what people said because I want to throw it open immediately to comments that you might have or questions that you might have for any of our panellists. And the doors are locked.
So we can't escape.
I'll kick off then. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and the barometer reflects this, and I think where it challenges you, is that I think, Chris, your argument is that it's just funding. It seems to me your argument seems to be that it's predominantly just about a funding relationship that challenges independence. But do you think there are organisations whose independence is being challenged by government for other reasons, political reasons, for example?
Quite possibly. We've always been apolitical. It's kind of connected to money in a sense that it's our observation that organisations that have been well funded to deliver programmes that are politically associated with a political party. So, for instance, Labour's approach to whatever. Then come the inevitable change of government, there may be a sort of political desire to disassociate with those organisations because of the association with the enemy politically. So I think there's potentially a problem with organisations sort of riding the sort of ebb and flow of our party's back in power, we can get funding again, and potentially that would mean that a particular organisation completely disappearing off the map, under a certain government. So it's always, my experience is very much about market reforms and what impact those has on them. But I guess the other potentially political elements to that as well.
Cathy.
First of all, I did want to warn Chris that the last person who suggests the sector should split into two was hung, drawn and quartered. Take care of that one. Yes, I thought it was quite interesting the way the National Trust has spoken out very strongly against the current the planning policy the government's developing. And I thought I wanted to ask anyone from the panel or all of them, what do you think is enabling the National Trust to do that at the moment? Why isn't it worried about speaking out? What are the conditions that have either impelled it or enabled it to take such a strong...
I don't know that section of the market, but has it got a natural competitor? Has it got someone that could take over what it does?
Very good question. Very short answer. Total monopoly, I would say.
I think it's quite significant as well that it's a membership organisation, the National Trust. It doesn't have public funding. So it's entirely membership.
Well, that's an even better answer than mine.
I think it's also interesting, looking back to the debate about the forests, that some of the big charities I think were quite late to come into the debate about the forests, and some other organisations took up the raise, and then there was criticism from Jonathan Porridge, I think it was, that the charities hadn't spoken up. So perhaps. And then the National Trust did come in and others. So perhaps that there's a sort of feeling that actually to prove its authority, it should actually come out and start being a bit more open about its position. I think that just on this point about is it just funding, I think that organisations do worry about influence. That even if they don't receive funding, and obviously the National Trust has got huge resources, massive membership. I think there is, there is sometimes a view that if you're too controversial, the government will stop speaking to you, and if you're not powerful enough, then that's going to be a worry. But I think one of the really striking things that came through the forest debate is how powerful charities and voluntary sector bodies can be, much more powerful than they probably allowed themselves to be. And I read something very interesting. Which I was absolutely startled by. I read it in the NCVO charity almanac, which is that the membership of organisations that like the National Trust and a small number of others is absolutely massive. It's it's 6 million, something like that, of a small group of green charities alone. Whereas the membership of political parties in this country is now sort of less than 500,000, and I think perhaps what was startling about the forest debate is that there is power there for people to take, if they've got the courage.
Matthew, do you want to?
I'm just a little bit concerned about this, what I see as a bit of a push towards innovation, because so many of the organizations, small ones that I work with, you know, they've done something, they've figured it out, they do it really well, it's needed, it's evidenced, but it's not particularly innovative. And I feel like there's a bit of a kind of, almost an oppression of innovation, if you will. I wonder if you could, and I feel like it came through also.
Can I just clarify on that question? Is that related specifically to government funding, or would you broaden that out to be including charitable funding?
I would broaden it out to both. I would say both.
Yeah.
I think it's a general, but I also felt that it sort of came through in this as well. So I just wonder if anyone wants to comment on that.
I have Rob McMillan at the back and Pete Alcock next.
Thanks, Carl. So Rob McMillan from the Third Sector Research Centre at the University of Birmingham. I think there's a bit of an elephant in the room which doesn't appear to be mentioned that much. I'm a bit worried that the debate is going to be a bit technical about what facilitates or enables independence. And the elephant in the room is about ideology and the appropriate role of the state and the appropriate role of the sector. Because actually I think those things have been recast and unsettled over the last kind of few years, and I think it's really important for us as researchers, academics and practitioners to get involved in that debate about what appropriate roles are. Because that debate is taking place, but it doesn't appear to be taking place in the terms of this plenary just yet, or potentially in terms of the panel. And I wonder whether ultimately we might need to get Nick Deakin back to do a new commission about what the role of the sector is, or whether the Bearing panel might become that space for debate about the sector. I think the current government is interested in two ways in the sector, and it's a complete recasting of relationships. On the one hand, it is that sense of it's just another provider, it's an alternative to the state because the state's no good. So if it can cut it in terms of private sector type of competition relationships, then great, and that's fine, you might be able to get contracts, etc. But very few will be able to do that. And at the other end, the government appears to be interested in very small, very granular activities, community-based activities, which form the heart of this thing called the big society, provided there's no money flows that go from government from it. So it's a recoupling, an uncoupling of the relationship between the sector and the state that we might be witnessing. But that doesn't appear to be being discussed or debated.
Pete Alcock from the Third Sector Research Centre, Birmingham too. I know independence ought to be an absolute concept, but actually I think in this context it isn't. It's a relative concept. And I wonder therefore if the various nuances of that relativeness need to be inserted into both general debate about independence and in particular the work of the panel and others who are concerned with it. And that's relative, i.e. independent of what, and independent to what extent. But I think particularly for the sector, we're talking about a very diverse entity when we talk about the third sector, leaving aside all the terminological issues. There are different kinds of independence that will be differently important to different organisations depending upon what they do and upon who they work with. For some organisations, financial independence will be critical, and for others it won't be. For some, ability to set their own targets and their own forms of measurement will be important for some activities, and for others they won't. So actually I think it's a much more nuanced concept, and I'm worried that it's sometimes treated as an automatic good, i.e. independence is a good thing and dependence is a bad thing, and I think that difference is relative, not dichotomal. But also I think there are different kinds of independence which matter in different circumstances for different sorts of activities, and I think that needs to be considered in any debate about it.
Okay, so innovation, ideology, and then nuances.
Well, I certainly agree with you that if you define independence as freedom of voice, action and purpose, that's not inevitably meaning a focus on innovation. It's the freedom to do what you think needs to be done. And I think I said in my comments that actually one of the things that independence enables you to do is to innovate, but it also enables you to think critically, to think about what, to do what you've been doing if you feel that's effective. So I don't think there's a distinction there. A problem there. In terms about the appropriate role of the sector, and this being not necessarily a technical debate, the appropriate role of that organisation is exactly the sorts of discussions that I think were prompted in these organisations that we were supporting. And I'm sure you're right that